When I worked at a hospital, there was a chat group named 100 Ways to Get Rid of Someone. My name is Rachel, and I need to tell a story that changed my life forever. It's about what I discovered during my first job as a nurse at the prestigious Riverside Memorial Hospital in Portland, Oregon. A story that almost cost me my life, but also showed me what I'm truly capable of. I remember perfectly that first day in September when I finally received my registered nurse license. After 4 years at Oregon Health and Science University, I was ready to put into practice everything I had learned. Riverside Memorial had an impeccable reputation. It was considered one of the best hospitals in the northwest of the country, specializing in cardiology. Getting a position there as a recent graduate was almost a miracle. My first night shift was scheduled for a Friday. I was nervous but determined to make a good impression. The hospital at night had a completely different atmosphere, poorly lit corridors, the echo of my steps on the linoleum floor, and that characteristic smell of disinfectant mixed with something I couldn't identify. I was directed to the women's locker room to store my belongings. It was a small and cramped space, with rusty metal lockers that seemed to have seen better days. While changing clothes, I noticed a tablet forgotten on one of the benches. The screen was on, showing an active chat group. Curiosity got the better of me. The group name immediately caught my attention. 100 Ways to Get Rid of Someone. I thought it was some joke between employees. Maybe a venting group about difficult patients. All participants used medical codes as usernames. Cardio 237, Emergency 51, ICU Delta, Surgery Phoenix. The messages I read gave me chills. They weren't normal work complaints. The participants discussed difficult cases that needed to be definitively resolved during something called Heart Health Week, which would happen at the end of the month. The language was coded, but there was something sinister in those words. Emergency 51. Case 237 is being problematic again. Suggestions? ICU Delta. Respiratory complication? Always works. Surgery Phoenix. Better wait for the event. Less suspicion with the movement. My heart raced. Should I be reading this? I quickly memorized some of the usernames and turned off the tablet, placing it exactly where I found it. I tried to convince myself that I was misinterpreting the messages, that it was just beginner paranoia. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of anxiety. I met some colleagues, veteran nurses like Sandra and Kevin, who seemed nice but distant. Dr. Marcus, the medical director, made a quick presentation, emphasizing the importance of professional discretion and institutional loyalty. His words sounded like a warning. During the early morning hours, while making my rounds through the rooms, I heard a quiet conversation coming from the medical break room. I recognized the deep voice of Dr. Marcus talking to two nurses. I hid behind a medication cart to listen. The patient in 237 is becoming a problem, Marcus said in an irritated tone. He asked too many questions yesterday. Wants to see his medical record. Questions the medications. Even asked to speak with a lawyer. I can take care of that tonight, replied a voice I recognized as Kevin's. A small complication during the midnight medication. Nothing suspicious. Wait for the signal, Marcus instructed. During Health Week, with all the visitor movement, it will be easier to justify any incident. My blood froze. They were planning something terrible for the patient in room 237. I needed to check who this person was and what was happening. I waited until they dispersed and then discreetly headed to room 237. The sign on the door identified the patient as Mr. David, 52 years old. I peered through the corridor window and saw a middle-aged man awake, typing on a laptop. He seemed alert and worried. I knocked gently on the door and entered. Good evening, Mr. David. I'm Rachel, the night shift nurse. How are you feeling? He looked at me with initial distrust, but then relaxed. Thank you for asking. I'm well, considering the circumstances. You're new here, aren't you? Yes, it's my first shift. I hesitated, but continued. May I ask why you're hospitalized? I came for elective heart surgery, he explained. But things got complicated. I'm an investigative journalist. I work for the Portland Tribune. I was investigating irregularities in hospitals in the region when I started having heart problems. What a coincidence, right? My stomach tightened. He was investigating hospitals and now was hospitalized exactly at Riverside Memorial. What kind of irregularities? David studied me for a moment before answering. Suspicious mortality rates, inadequate medications, defective equipment being used on patients without resources. Have you noticed anything strange here? Before I could answer, we heard footsteps in the corridor. I quickly said goodbye and left the room, pretending to continue my normal rounds. But my mind was racing. David was investigating exactly the kind of thing I had seen in that chat. The rest of the early morning passed slowly. I checked room 237 whenever possible, but David seemed to be fine. At 6 a.m., when my shift was ending, I received the news I feared. Sandra approached me with a somber expression. Rachel, I need to warn you. The patient in 237, Mr. David, had complications during the early morning. Sudden cardiac arrest around 4:30 a.m. We couldn't resuscitate him. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. But I was checking on him regularly. He seemed fine. Sometimes these things happen, Sandra said with a tone that seemed rehearsed. Unexpected complications are part of medicine. You'll get used to it. But I knew they weren't unexpected complications. I had heard Marcus's conversation. They had planned it. And somehow, I had become a witness to murder. I left the hospital that morning knowing my life had changed forever. I was no longer just a recent graduate nurse trying to establish myself in my career. I had discovered something terrible, and now I needed to decide what to do with this information. David was dead, but his investigation couldn't die with him. In the following days, I couldn't get David's death out of my head. Every time I entered Riverside Memorial, I felt a weight in my chest, as if I were carrying a deadly secret, which was exactly what was happening. I began to pay more attention to the details around me, and what I discovered left me even more disturbed. It was during my second week that I was temporarily transferred to the emergency department. Dr. Peter, the nursing supervisor, said it was to broaden my experience, but I suspected they wanted to observe me more closely after my questions about David. The emergency department was controlled chaos during the day, but at night, it revealed its dark secrets. It was there that I began to understand the real extent of Riverside Memorial's problems. The conditions were deplorable, much worse than any nursing student could imagine. The first sign was the equipment: heart monitors with cracked screens that showed inconsistent readings, defibrillators that frequently failed on the first attempt, ventilators with strange noises that were fixed with duct tape. When I questioned Sandra about a clearly defective monitor, she just shrugged. "We've already reported this several times," she said, without lifting her eyes from the paperwork. "Administration says there's no budget for new equipment. You learn to work with what you have." But what shocked me most was discovering expired medications being used routinely. During my first week in emergency, I found an entire cabinet with medications that had expired months ago, some even more than a year ago. When I brought this to Dr. Peter, he looked at me with irritation. "Rachel, you need to understand how a real hospital works," he said condescendingly. "These medications are still effective. The expiration date is just a legal precaution. Throwing away expensive medications would be criminal waste." "But don't patients deserve safe and effective medications?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Peter approached me, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully, rookie nurse. Your function here is to follow protocols, not question administrative decisions. Idealistic nurses who cause problems don't last long in this hospital. Understood?" The threat was clear, but instead of intimidating me, it only strengthened my determination. I began to secretly document everything. I photographed defective equipment, noted expiration dates of medications, recorded cases of negligence I witnessed. It was then that I discovered the numbers. Working on the nursing computer during a quiet shift, I gained access to the hospital's mortality data. What I saw made me nauseous. Riverside Memorial had a mortality rate 40% higher than the national average, especially in certain sectors and during specific hours, exactly the hours of weekend night shifts. The accidents followed a disturbing pattern. Patients with specific profiles, journalists, lawyers, activists, people who asked too many questions or who had resources to sue the hospital, had a statistically impossible tendency to develop unexpected complications. I began to understand that David wasn't an isolated case. There was a systematic operation to silence inconvenient people, and medical accidents were the perfect tool. Who would question the death of a cardiac patient in a hospital? Especially when doctors provided convincing technical explanations about post-operative complications and unforeseen adverse reactions. But I couldn't just observe. My conscience wouldn't allow me to remain passive while innocent people died. I decided to act, even if it meant risking my career and possibly my life. I started small. I used my own money, which wasn't much, considering my beginner nurse salary, to buy basic supplies that the hospital didn't have budget to provide: sterile gauze, quality disposable gloves, basic pain medications. I kept everything in my locker and used discreetly when necessary. I also began to dedicate extra time to patients I perceived were being neglected. I stayed beyond my hours to verify they were receiving adequate care, talked with them to understand their concerns, and sometimes redirected their medication when I noticed they were receiving incorrect doses or expired medications. My first big test came in the third week. An elderly lady, Mrs. Eleanor, 78 years old, was hospitalized with pneumonia. During my night rounds, I noticed her medication was programmed for a dose that seemed excessive for someone of her age and weight. I checked the medical record twice and confirmed my suspicion. The prescribed dose was 3 times larger than recommended for a patient of her profile. When I questioned Kevin, who was preparing the medication, he told me he was following medical orders. The orders are incorrect, I insisted. This dose could cause an overdose. Kevin looked at me with irritation. Rachel, are you questioning a doctor? Dr. Marcus prescribed this dose personally. My blood froze. Marcus again. I realized that Mrs. Eleanor was being deliberately overdosed. She had mentioned earlier that she was a lawyer's widow and that her family had resources. Maybe she knew too much about the hospital's conditions, or maybe she was simply a convenient victim. I take responsibility for her medication, I said firmly. I'll administer the correct dose. Kevin hesitated, but was busy with other patients. Do what you want, but when there's a problem, don't involve me. I administered the correct dose to Mrs. Eleanor and kept an eye on her throughout the early morning. By morning, she was much better, responding well to treatment. When her daughter arrived to visit her, the lady was sitting in bed, smiling and talking. Nurse Rachel, the daughter sought me in the corridor. My mother won't stop talking about you. She said you saved her life last night. I just did my job, I replied, but felt deep satisfaction. For the first time since I had started working there, I felt I was really making a difference. But my satisfaction was interrupted when I saw Dr. Peter approaching with a furious expression. Rachel, I need to speak with you. Now. He took me to his office and closed the door forcefully. What do you think you're doing? Dr. Marcus approached me furious because you altered a medical prescription without authorization. The dose was incorrect. It could have killed the patient. You don't have authority to make that decision, he shouted. You're a recent graduate nurse, not a doctor. When a senior doctor like Dr. Marcus prescribes something, you follow orders, period. Even if those orders could kill the patient? Peter leaned over his desk, staring at me with cold eyes. Rachel, I'll be very clear. This hospital has specific protocols and hierarchies that must be respected. Idealistic nurses who think they know more than experienced doctors are a problem, and problems are solved. Understood? I understood perfectly. It was another threat. More direct this time. But instead of scaring me, it only confirmed that I was on the right path. They were nervous, which meant my interference was working. I understand, I replied calmly, but I also understand that my nursing oath obliges me to do no harm to patients. And that's what I'll continue doing. Peter dismissed me with an irritated wave, but I realized I had won a small victory. Mrs. Eleanor was alive and recovering. It was a beginning. Mrs. Eleanor's salvation marked a turning point for me. I realized I couldn't fight corruption alone in a confrontational way. I needed to be more strategic. If they wanted to see me as a naive, idealistic nurse, I would use that perception to my advantage. I began to act more subtly. Instead of openly questioning medical orders, I developed a system. When I noticed suspicious prescriptions, I accidentally spilled medications, caused small delays, or confused dosages, always ensuring patients received adequate care without it seeming intentional. My reputation among patients grew quickly. Families began to specifically request that I care for their loved ones. I created a more humane environment in the sectors where I worked. I brought small comforts like extra pillows, organized more flexible visiting hours when possible, and most importantly, really listened to patients' concerns. Some nurses began to notice what I was doing. Initially, they kept their distance, probably afraid of being associated with me after Peter's warnings, but gradually, some began to silently support my mission. The first was Maria, a nurse with 15 years of experience who worked in the ICU. During a particularly difficult shift, she approached me in the corridor. Rachel, she said quietly, looking around to make sure we were alone. I need to tell you something. What you did for Mrs. Eleanor. I should have done that years ago. Maria, No, she interrupted me. Let me talk. I've worked here for a long time. I've seen many things I shouldn't have seen, many patients who died when they shouldn't have died. But I had family to support, bills to pay. I was a coward. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. But you reminded me why I became a nurse. To care for people, not to stay quiet while they're being hurt. From that day on, Maria became my secret ally. She alerted me about suspicious prescriptions, helped me identify patients at risk, and most importantly, began to document the irregularities she witnessed. Other nurses gradually joined our informal group, nurses who had lost hope but still had conscience. Tom from pediatrics began passing us information about expired medications being used on children. Lisa from the surgery department alerted us about defective equipment being used in operations. We created a discreet communication network, always making sure our actions seemed like isolated coincidences. But Dr. Peter was watching. During a nursing meeting in the 4th week, he made comments that were clearly directed at me. "I've noticed certain irregularities in some sectors," he said, looking directly at me. "Nurses who think they can improve protocols established for decades. This needs to stop," he continued with a cold smile. "I want to remind everyone that this hospital has a reputation to maintain. Employees who don't fit our organizational culture will be replaced, and their references will adequately reflect their performance here." The threat was clear. He could destroy my career with negative references, making it impossible to get work at any other hospital. But Maria gave me an encouraging look, and I realized I was no longer alone in this battle. The situation escalated when I decided to confront Dr. Marcus directly. I had collected enough evidence of the irregularities and believed that maybe, if I presented the facts professionally, he would consider changes. How naive I was. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus under the pretext of discussing improvements in nursing protocols. He received me in his luxurious office, a stark contrast with the precarious conditions of the rest of the hospital. "Miss Rachel," he said without lifting his eyes from the paperwork, "I heard you've been proactive in your duties. What would you like to talk about?" I took a deep breath and began. "Dr. Marcus, I've observed some inconsistencies in our protocols that I believe could be improved to ensure better patient care. I presented my carefully organized documentation, evidence of expired medications, defective equipment, dosage discrepancies. I spoke about mortality rates and suspicious statistical patterns, always maintaining a professional tone and suggesting that maybe it was a matter of inadequate resources or insufficient training. Marcus listened to me in silence, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "Interesting analysis, Miss Rachel," he said finally. "You clearly dedicated a lot of time to this research. I care about patient welfare, Dr. Marcus." "Of course you do." He smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "And I appreciate your dedication. In fact, your observations are quite timely." My heart accelerated. Maybe he really would consider changes. "You see," Marcus continued, "we're approaching our annual Heart Health Week. It's a very important event for the hospital. We bring hundreds of visitors for free exams, medical demonstrations, educational lectures. The local press always covers the event." He got up and walked to the window. "It would be unfortunate if some visitor or journalist noticed the irregularities you documented. It could harm our reputation and, consequently, our ability to serve the community. So you'll implement the improvements?" I asked hopefully. Marcus turned to me with that cold smile again. "Oh, yes. We'll implement significant temporary changes before and during the event. New equipment will be rented, fresh medications will be stocked, special protocols will be followed, all to ensure that Riverside Memorial shines during the informal inspection that inevitably accompanies these events." My stomach sank when I understood his words. "And after the event?" "After?" Marcus shrugged. "We'll return to normal operations. After all, special events require special measures, but we can't maintain these elevated standards permanently. It would be financially unfeasible. But the patients will receive exactly the level of care they've always received." He interrupted me firmly. "And intelligent employees will understand that certain operational realities are necessary to keep this hospital running." He approached me, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. "Miss Rachel, I'll be direct. I know about your activities over the past weeks. I know about the medications you accidentally discarded, the doses you confused, the reports you didn't fill out adequately." My blood froze. He knew everything. "I also know," Marcus continued, "that accidents can happen to anyone. Medical equipment fails, medications can cause unexpected allergic reactions, stairs can be slippery. It would be terrible if something happened to such a dedicated nurse as you." The threat couldn't be clearer. Marcus wasn't just protecting a corrupt system. He was willing to eliminate me if I continued interfering. "I understand perfectly, Dr. Marcus," I replied, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Thank you for clarifying the situation." "Great. I'm sure you'll make the right decisions from now on." I left Marcus's office knowing I had crossed a line from which there was no return. He not only knew about my activities, he had directly threatened me. This meant I was being considered a real threat to their operation, but it also meant I was on the right path. If they were willing to threaten me, it was because I was really making a difference. And the mention of Heart Health Week gave me a disturbing idea. If they were planning a facade during the event, what else were they planning? I remembered the messages in the chat I found on the first day, mentioning that difficult cases would be resolved during Health Week. I began to understand that the event wasn't just an opportunity to cover up the hospital's deplorable conditions. It was a perfect distraction to eliminate problematic people, while hundreds of visitors and press were present, creating confusion and chaos that could mask any accident they wanted to cause. After the meeting with Marcus, I knew I was being constantly watched. Peter assigned me to the most difficult shifts, always with extra supervision from nurses I knew were loyal to the administration, but this only strengthened my determination. If they were worried enough to monitor me so closely, it meant I was causing the impact I hoped for. It was during one of these intense watches that the incident happened that would change everything. It was a Thursday night, 2 weeks before Heart Health Week. I had just finished a particularly exhausting double shift and was heading to the parking lot when I noticed I was being followed. Gary, a radiology technician I knew was involved in the corrupt scheme, had left the hospital shortly after me and was now walking in the same direction. Gary had a bad reputation, rumors about aggressive behavior, alcohol problems, and several harassment complaints that were never adequately investigated. The hospital parking lot was poorly lit and practically empty at that hour. I quickened my pace but heard Gary's footsteps accelerating too. When I reached my car, a used Honda Civic that was all I could afford with my beginner nurse salary, I nervously fumbled with the keys. "Hey, Rachel." Gary's voice sounded behind me, loaded with alcohol and hostility. "I need to talk to you." I turned to face him, keeping the car between us. "Gary, it's late. If you have something professional to discuss, we can talk tomorrow at the hospital." He laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. "Professional? You want to talk about professionalism? After everything you've done to cause problems? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play stupid," he shouted, approaching. "Everyone knows you're snooping where you shouldn't, asking too many questions, causing problems for people who work hard at this hospital." The smell of alcohol got stronger as he approached. I realized he was clearly drunk and dangerous. "Gary, you're drunk. Go home and sleep." "I'll go home when I want." He hit his fist on my car hood, making me jump. "But first, you're going to stop causing problems. Dr. Marcus is fed up with you, and we're all fed up too." I tried to go around the car to reach the driver's door, but Gary moved to block my path. "Where do you think you're going? We're not done talking yet." "Gary, get away from my car, now. Or what? You'll report me?" He laughed again, an unpleasant sound that echoed through the empty parking lot. "To whom? Dr. Peter? Dr. Marcus? They already know what kind of employee you are. A troublemaker who doesn't know when to stop." I tried once more to go around the car, but Gary grabbed my arm forcefully. "Let me go," I shouted, trying to pull away. "You're going to listen to me." His grip tightened and I felt his nails digging into my skin. Some people need to learn the hard way when to stop sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. It was then that I saw the envelope in his other hand, documents I had secretly photographed, evidence of the hospital's irregularities. My blood froze. They had invaded my locker. "Recognize this?" Gary waved the papers in my face. "Did you think no one would discover your little private investigation? Dr. Marcus knows everything, you idiot." I tried to grab the documents, but Gary pulled them away. "These papers are going to disappear, just like any stupid idea you have about exposing this hospital." "Gary, you don't understand. This evidence shows that patients are dying unnecessarily. Patients die. That's what happens in hospitals." He pushed me against the car forcefully. "And meddling nurses can also have accidents if they don't know when to stop." The push unbalanced me and I fell to the ground, scratching my hands on the rough asphalt. Gary stood above me, intimidating. "Now you're going to stop this heroin nonsense or things are going to get much worse for you." When he bent down to intimidate me more, I acted on instinct. I grabbed my purse and swung it hard, hitting Gary on the side of his head. He staggered, dropping the documents which scattered in the wind. "You bitch," he screamed, holding his head. "You're going to pay for this." I ran desperately to collect the papers while Gary recovered. I managed to grab most of them before he reached me again. But this time he was furious. He grabbed me by the shoulders and threw me against the car violently, my head hitting the side window. Pain exploded through my skull and I felt blood dripping. Gary was shouting something, but my hearing was muffled. I tried to defend myself, but he was much stronger. That's when I heard an authoritative voice cutting through the night. "Get away from her now!" Gary turned, still holding me. A tall man was quickly approaching from the other side of the parking lot. Even in my disoriented condition, I recognized Dr. James, the cardiac surgeon I had seen a few times in the hospital corridors. This is none of your business, doctor, Gary growled, but released my shoulders. Release her immediately, or I'll call security. Dr. James spoke with calm but threatening authority. Actually, I'll call regardless. Gary looked between the two of us, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he spat on the ground near my feet. This isn't over, Rachel. You don't know who you're messing with. He walked away quickly, disappearing between the cars. Dr. James immediately came toward me, assessing my injuries with experienced medical eyes. Are you okay? Can you hear me clearly? His voice was gentle but professional. I think so, I replied, touching my head where it had hit. My hand came away stained with blood. Let's get you inside. You need to be examined properly. No! The word came out stronger than I intended. I can't go back there. Gary was working for them. Dr. James studied me carefully. Are you talking about Dr. Marcus and Dr. Peter? The question surprised me. You know about them? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I've suspected for some time that something is wrong at this hospital. Do you have evidence? I looked at the crumpled document still in my hand. I had more, but let's talk somewhere safe. My private office is a few blocks from here. I can treat your injuries there and you can tell me everything. During the next hour, in Dr. James's well-equipped office, he carefully cleaned my wounds while I told the whole story, from the chat I found on the first day to Marcus's threat in the meeting. He listened without interruptions, occasionally asking specific questions. Rachel, he said when I finished, you're in real danger. What you discovered is worse than I imagined. You already suspected something? Dr. James sighed heavily. 2 years ago, my brother David was hospitalized at this hospital for routine heart surgery. He died from unexpected complications. David was a lawyer. He was investigating hospital irregularities for a case he was working on. My heart stopped. David? Dr. James looked at me with surprise. You knew him? He was the first patient I saw die after I heard that conversation. I knew something was wrong. He was my brother-in-law, explained James. I changed to my wife's surname when I married. Marcus never knew about the family connection. Everything began to make sense. Is that why you were in the parking lot tonight? Were you watching me? I was protecting you, he corrected. As soon as I heard about a new nurse asking too many questions, I knew you could be in danger. I've been waiting 2 years for someone brave enough to challenge this system. So what do we do now? Doctor. James leaned forward. Now we plan how to expose this operation once and for all. But first, I need to warn you about something I discovered today. He picked up a paper from his desk. Marcus has a history. Before coming to Riverside Memorial, he worked at 3 other hospitals. All had significant increases in mortality rates during his time there, and all lost accreditation or were closed after scandals. He's done this before? Several times. And he always manages to leave before being directly implicated. But this time will be different. Why? Because this time he threatened the wrong person. Dr. James handed me another document. And because Heart Health Week isn't just an opportunity for him to cover up the hospital's conditions, it's when he plans his grand finale. I read the document with growing horror. It was a list of names, patients scheduled for procedures during the event week. I recognized some: an investigative reporter, a lawyer specializing in medical malpractice, a whistleblower from a pharmaceutical company, and several other people who could be problematic for corrupt operations. He plans to eliminate all of them during the event? I asked, horrified. With hundreds of visitors and press teams present, it will be easy to blame chaos for any accident. And then, as always, he'll disappear before anyone can connect him to the crimes. We need to stop this. Yes, agreed Dr. James. But we have to be smart. Marcus knows you're a threat now. After the incident with Gary, he'll accelerate his plans. As if it were a sinister cue, my phone rang. It was a message from an unknown number. Accidents can happen to anyone, anywhere. I hope you learned your lesson tonight. A concerned friend. Doctor. James read the message over my shoulder. He's no longer being subtle. We have few days before the event. If we're going to act, it has to be now. The day of Heart Health Week arrived with beautiful October sunshine and festive energy that cruelly contrasted with the terror I felt. The hospital had transformed overnight. New, shiny equipment appeared magically. Walls were painted, and extra staff were temporarily hired to give an impression of abundant resources. Dr. James and I had spent the last 3 days planning our strategy. We couldn't go to the police without more concrete evidence. Marcus had been too careful to leave direct traces, and his local political influence was considerable. Our only chance was to catch him in the act during the event, when he tried to execute his sinister plans. The event began at 8 a.m. with hundreds of families arriving for free heart exams. There were screening stations, CPR demonstrations, heart health lectures, and a general atmosphere of celebration. Local news teams circulated, interviewing doctors and happy families. It was the perfect facade. But I knew that behind all this joy, there was a list of people marked to die. James had given me a small recording device and obtained access to the medical records of the patients on the list. Our mission was simple in theory: prevent any of them from being treated by Marcus's corrupt team while collecting evidence of their attempts. The first target was Margaret, a 45-year-old investigative journalist who had been investigating hospital irregularities in the region. She was scheduled for a routine heart exam at 10 a.m. in the cardiology department, exactly where Marcus and his team would be operating. I arrived at the cardiology department 15 minutes before her appointment, using my nurse access to check the preparations. What I saw made me feel nauseous. A syringe with a clear substance was prepared next to the examination equipment, most likely potassium chloride, which would cause instant cardiac arrest and would be almost impossible to detect in a quick autopsy. When Mrs. Margaret arrived, radiant and talking with her teenage daughter about the importance of preventive checkups, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let a dedicated mother die right in front of her own daughter. "Mrs. Margaret?" I approached with a professional smile. "I'm Rachel, the nurse responsible for exams this morning. I have a small schedule change." "Any problem?" she asked. "Nothing serious, but our main cardiologist had an emergency. We're going to transfer your exam to Dr. James on the 3rd floor. He's our most experienced specialist." Marcus was on the other side of the room, preparing his equipment. I saw his expression change when he realized I was interfering again. He began to approach, but I quickly directed Mrs. Margaret and her daughter to the elevators. "Nurse Rachel?" Marcus's voice sounded behind me when the elevator doors closed with my patients safely inside. "How interesting to see you redirecting my patients." "Dr. James specifically requested this case," I lied smoothly. "Something about his specialization in journalists. I mean, in certain types of arrhythmia." Marcus looked at me with cold fury, but couldn't make a scene in front of so many witnesses and cameras. "I understand. How dedicated of you." During the next hours, I managed to protect 3 more people from the list using similar tactics. I redirected a lawyer for a more comprehensive checkup with James, accidentally spilled medications that would have been used on an elderly lady, and triggered a false fire alarm when I saw Marcus approaching a pharmaceutical whistleblower. But Marcus was getting desperate. Around 2 p.m., he cornered me in a less busy corridor. "Congratulations, Rachel," he said with dangerous calm. "You managed to disrupt some of my procedures today, but you can't be everywhere at once." "I don't know what you're talking about, Dr. Marcus." "Of course not." He leaned closer. "But let me be very clear. There are patients in this hospital today who represent significant threats to legitimate medical operations. If they leave here alive, other innocent people may suffer the consequences. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you about complex medical realities that you clearly don't understand." It was then that I heard over the intercom, "Code Blue, Pediatric Wing, Room 314. Code Blue, Pediatric Wing, Room 314. My blood froze. Code Blue meant cardiorespiratory arrest. Marcus smiled. "Pediatric emergencies are so tragic," he said casually, "especially when they happen during chaotic public events like this." I ran to the pediatric wing, my heart beating hard. Room 314 was full of frantic medical activity. A child about 8 years old was being resuscitated. It was Timothy, son of a lawyer specializing in medical malpractice who was on Marcus's list. Dr. Peter was directing the resuscitation, but I immediately realized he was administering the wrong medications. Instead of epinephrine, he was using something that would seem correct to casual observers, but would actually worsen the child's condition. "Dr. Peter," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "are you sure that's the correct dose of atropine for a child this age?" Peter hesitated, holding the syringe. "Of course I'm sure. Because from my experience in pediatrics, that dose would be lethal for an 8-year-old boy." It wasn't true. I had minimal pediatric experience, but I said it with such conviction that several other doctors present began to question. "Nurse Rachel is right," said one of the visiting cardiologists. "That dose is too high." Peter had no choice but to recalculate the medication. With the correct medication, Timothy began to respond. His oxygen saturation improved, and within minutes he was stable. Timothy's parents arrived running, desperate and grateful. "Thank you," the mother grabbed me. "Thank you for saving our son." But I knew the battle was far from over. Marcus had escalated his tactics to include children. This meant he was desperate enough to cross any line. It was at 4 p.m. that I realized he had prepared a trap for me. An announcement over the intercom requested my immediate presence in the basement laboratory for a medication emergency. It was obviously a trap, but it could also be an opportunity. I called James and warned him about where I was going, then headed to the basement. The laboratory was empty except for Marcus and 2 men I didn't recognize, probably private security or worse. "Miss Rachel," Marcus said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So helpful as always, responding to emergencies." "Where's the medication emergency?" "Oh, the emergency is you." Marcus signaled to the men who began to approach. "You see, you've become a problem that needs to be permanently resolved." It was when I realized that Marcus had underestimated something important. During all our interactions, he saw me as a young and naive nurse who had stumbled upon something she didn't understand. He didn't realize I had been planning this confrontation with James for days. "Actually, Dr. Marcus," I said, discreetly checking my recording device, "the emergency is yours." I pressed the nearest fire alarm button. The deafening sound echoed throughout the hospital. Immediately, emergency evacuation protocols were activated. Hundreds of visitors, staff, and press teams began moving toward the exits. "What did you do?" Marcus shouted over the alarm. "I triggered a complete evacuation. In a few minutes, this place will be full of firefighters, paramedics, and emergency teams. All the patients on your list will be evacuated by independent emergency personnel." Marcus's face turned red with rage. "You have no idea what you just did. There are people in this hospital who need to die today." "Need to repeat that?" I raised my recording device, showing it was working, because I'm sure the FBI would be very interested in listening. It was then that Marcus completely lost control. He signaled to his thugs and ran toward me, but I had spent the last weeks planning for this moment. I ran to the laboratory's main computer, where James had told me Marcus kept his most sensitive files. During the chaos of the chase, I managed to insert the flash drive James had given me and start downloading all the system files. Marcus and his men were almost catching me when I heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. James had arrived with hospital security, the honest guards he had identified as not being part of the corrupt scheme. The confrontation in the laboratory was quick but intense. When security arrived, Marcus tried to bluff, claiming I had invaded confidential systems. But the flash drive had already finished downloading, and the recordings I collected during the day provided enough context for any investigator to understand what was happening. "Dr. Marcus," James said with calm authority, "I suggest you stay exactly where you are. The police are on their way." But Marcus had one last card to play. One of his thugs, who we discovered later was Gary, disguised as security, pulled out a gun. The small, cramped laboratory exploded in chaos. "Nobody moves!" Gary shouted, clearly panicking. "Dr. Marcus, we need to get out of here now!" It was at that moment that James proved to be braver than I had ever imagined. He placed himself between Gary and me, protecting me with his own body. "Gary, lower the gun. You don't want to add homicide to your charges." "Shut up! This is all that meddling nurse's fault." Gary was visibly unstable, probably still under the influence of alcohol or drugs. If she hadn't messed where she shouldn't have, nobody would have gotten hurt. "Gary, listen to me." I tried a different approach. "I know you're not a killer. You were dragged into this, right? Marcus promised to protect you, but look around. He's letting you carry the blame alone. I told you to shut up." Gary pointed the gun directly at me, but James didn't move from in front. "If you want to shoot someone," James said with impressive calm, "shoot me. Rachel was only trying to save innocent lives." It was then that I heard police sirens approaching the hospital. Gary also heard, and his panic increased. "Dr. Marcus, we have to go, now." But Marcus had disappeared. During the confrontation with the gun, he had escaped through the laboratory's emergency exit. Gary realized he had been abandoned, and his expression transformed from panic to despair. "He left me," Gary whispered, the gun trembling in his hands. "After everything I did for him, he just left me." "Gary, it's not too late yet," James said gently. "Lower the gun and tell the truth about what Marcus did. You can help ensure he pays for his crimes." For a moment, I thought Gary would accept. He slightly lowered the gun, and I saw tears in his eyes. But then Marcus appeared again, this time through the main entrance. "Gary, you're an idiot!" Marcus screamed. "Finish the job!" The distraction was enough. James took advantage to try to disarm Gary, and the two fought for control of the gun. In the confusion, I heard a gunshot. James fell. The rest happened very quickly. Police invaded the laboratory. Gary was subdued and arrested, and paramedics began working on James. I knelt beside him, applying pressure to the wound in his chest while tears streamed down my face. "James, stay awake," I begged. "You'll be fine. The paramedics are here." James smiled weakly. "Rachel, the flash drive has everything we need. Don't talk. Save your energy. I need to tell you about why I hired you." His voice was getting weaker. "Hired me? I influenced your hiring, knew about your ethical reputation from college, needed someone honest to help me expose Marcus." My world stopped. "You planned all this?" "I didn't plan for you to almost die," he whispered. "I'm sorry for putting you in danger." They took James to surgery while I stayed to give testimony to the police. The next hours passed in a haze of interrogations, explanations, and shocking revelations when the flash drive data was analyzed. Marcus's files contained evidence of a scheme that had been operating for years. It wasn't just about silencing problematic individuals. There was a complete operation of organ trafficking, insurance fraud, and contract killings. Riverside Memorial was just one node in a network that extended across several states. The evidence showed that selected patients were strategically killed, their organs sold on the black market, and life insurance was defrauded. Marcus had perfected the system in multiple hospitals over 2 decades. Peter was arrested trying to flee the state that same night. Gary confessed everything in exchange for a cooperation agreement. But Marcus had completely disappeared, at least temporarily. The federal investigation that followed discovered corruption at levels that shocked even experienced investigators. Dozens of employees were arrested, from doctors to administrators. The hospital was temporarily closed for complete investigation. I became a public figure overnight. Journalists wanted interviews. Patient rights organizations invited me to speak, and job offers came from hospitals across the country. But my only concern was James. He underwent 3 surgeries to repair the damage caused by the bullet. For 2 weeks, I remained at the hospital where he was admitted, working as a volunteer and watching his recovery. Doctors said he was lucky to be alive. When he finally woke up, the first thing he said was, "Rachel, are you okay?" "I should be asking you that," I replied, holding his hand. "You almost died protecting me." "It was worth it," he said with a weak smile. "We managed to stop Marcus. Actually, we haven't yet. He escaped." James became serious. "He'll make a mistake. Men like Marcus always do. And when that happens, the evidence we collected will ensure he never hurts anyone again." He was right. 3 months later, Marcus was arrested trying to establish the same operation at a hospital in Arizona. The data we obtained provided the FBI with a complete map of his network, leading to arrests in 6 states and saving countless lives. James recovered completely and was named medical director of the new Riverside Memorial when the hospital was reopened under new administration. He offered me the position of nursing supervisor, with authority to implement new transparency and safety protocols. I accepted, but with conditions. I wanted a system where any employee could report irregularities without fear of retaliation, where equipment would be regularly inspected by independent third parties, and where transparency would be a priority. The new Riverside Memorial became a national model. We implemented strict accountability protocols, surveillance systems to protect vulnerable patients, and continuous training programs on medical ethics. Most importantly, we created a culture where doing the right thing was valued above blind loyalty to hierarchy. 6 months after the reopening, I received an unexpected letter. It was from David Jr., son of the journalist who was killed during my first week. He had graduated in investigative journalism and wanted to write a book about the case. "Miss Rachel," he wrote, "my father always said that truth has a way of coming to light when brave people refuse to stay silent. Thank you for proving he was right." During our conversation, I discovered that James never told me the whole truth about how he knew me. David Jr. revealed that James had gone to his father's funeral and met the family. When he learned that I had been the last person to see his brother alive, James researched my academic trajectory, discovered my reputation for ethical integrity, and deliberately influenced my hiring. He knew he needed someone from outside the system to help him expose the corruption, David Jr. explained. But he also knew it would be dangerous. That's why he waited until he was sure you were brave enough to face Marcus. I confronted James about this later. "You used me as bait?" "Not exactly," he replied honestly. "I offered you an opportunity to make a difference. The choice of how to use that opportunity was always yours. And if I hadn't done anything, if I had simply ignored what I saw," James smiled, "then I would have continued looking until I found someone who would. But I always believed you would do the right thing, and I was right." Today, 2 years later, Riverside Memorial is nationally recognized for excellence in care and transparency. James and I developed a solid professional partnership based on mutual respect and shared commitment to medical ethics. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Peter received 25 years. Gary, in exchange for his complete cooperation, received 10 years and is participating in rehabilitation programs. As for me, I discovered I'm stronger than I ever imagined. Facing Marcus taught me that one determined person can make a real difference, even against a corrupt system. I also learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear. I still work occasional night shifts, and I still remember that first night when I found the tablet in the locker room. If I could go back in time, I would do everything again. Because every life we saved, every patient who received dignified care, every family that didn't lose a loved one unnecessarily, all of this was worth every moment of terror I experienced. The most important thing I learned is that sometimes people underestimate the power that an ordinary person can have when they refuse to accept the unacceptable. I was just a recent graduate nurse without political connections or significant financial resources. But I had something that Marcus and his corrupt network didn't expect: the absolute refusal to stay silent in the face of injustice. James and I got married last fall, in a small ceremony in the Reformed Hospital's garden. It was symbolic. We celebrated our love in the same place where we almost lost our lives fighting for what we believed in. David Jr. was our photographer, and many of the nurses who secretly supported me during those dark days were present. Maria, who was the first to join my cause, is now director of nursing. Tom leads our humanized pediatric program. Lisa developed new surgical safety protocols that are being adopted by hospitals across the country. Even Mrs. Eleanor, the elderly lady who was almost overdosed in my third week, became a patient rights advocate. She founded a nonprofit organization that monitors hospitals for irregularities and offers support to employees who report corruption. Timothy, the boy who almost died during Heart Health Week, grew up to become a healthy and bright kid. His family still sends Christmas cards every year, reminding me that every life we save has infinite waves of impact. The federal investigation revealed that Marcus's scheme had resulted in the death of at least 200 people over 2 decades. Each of these deaths represents a destroyed family, interrupted dreams, and lost human potential. Knowing that we managed to stop this death machine before more lives were lost is what gives me peace when I wake up in the middle of the night, still occasionally haunted by nightmares from those days. Marcus never expressed remorse for his actions. During his trial, he still insisted he was eliminating disruptive elements that harmed hospital efficiency. His complete lack of humanity only reinforced that we did the right thing by stopping him. David's legacy lives through the work we do today. His son published a book about the case that became a national bestseller, increasing awareness about hospital corruption and inspiring legislative reforms. The book's royalties fund scholarships for nurses who demonstrate exceptional commitment to medical ethics. Today, when new employees arrive at Riverside Memorial, I personally conduct their orientations. I tell them about our history, not to scare them, but to remind them that each of us has the power and responsibility to protect the patients under our care. Medicine, I tell them, is built on trust. Patients trust their lives to us. Families trust that we'll do everything in our power to care for their loved ones. This trust is sacred, and our responsibility to honor it never ends. Some people ask me if I'm afraid that something like this could happen again. The answer is that constant vigilance is the price of patient safety. Corrupt systems don't emerge overnight. They develop gradually when good people choose to stay silent in the face of small transgressions. That's why we created a culture of radical transparency at the new Riverside Memorial. Monthly meetings where any employee can express concerns anonymously. Regular audits by independent organizations. Protection programs for whistleblowers. And most importantly, the understanding that questioning protocols and authority isn't disloyalty, it's professionalism. James often says that I saved more than just individual lives. I saved the soul of the hospital itself, but I know I couldn't have done anything alone. It was the small acts of courage from many people. Maria refusing to stay silent, Tom documenting irregularities, Lisa reporting defective equipment, honest security guards who helped us in the end. That made real change possible. This story taught me that heroism isn't about grand dramatic gestures. It's about choosing to do the right thing, day after day, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, even when it seems like you're alone. It's about refusing to accept that this is how things are when you know things can and should be better. If there's a message I want people to take from this experience, it's this. You have more power than you imagine. One person willing to stand up for what's right can inspire others to do the same. And when good people unite with a common purpose, they can change entire systems. Riverside Memorial today isn't just a hospital. It's a symbol that transparency, accountability, and compassion can overcome corruption and greed. It's proof that when we face our fears and defend our values, we can create something better for everyone. And every night when I finish my shift and look at the well-lit corridors, functional equipment, and dedicated staff who now call this place home, I'm reminded that it was worth every moment of terror, every threat, every sleepless night. Because in the end, we saved more than individual lives. We saved hope that integrity can prevail, that truth can win, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept the unacceptable. This is the story I needed to tell. Not just about the corruption we discovered, but about the strength we found within ourselves to face it and overcome it.